Today we shall read Meeting at Night by Robert Browning. Robert Browning was a poet of Victorian era. Queen Victoria ascended the throne in the year 1830 and reigned till 1900. That means 70 long years. During Victorian era, England was at peace because England was not involved in any major warfare with any of its neighbors. And when the country was at peace, literature, science, etc. flourish. Same thing happened during Victorian era. The famous scientist John Darwin came during Victorian era with his theory survival for the fittest. Similarly, like science, literature also flourished during the period of Queen Victoria, or rather during the reign of Queen Victoria. Robert Browning was the poet of Victorian era. The other famous poet of the Victorian era was Lord Tennyson and Matthew Arnold. Lord Tennyson was the poet laureate of Victorian era. Now Robert Browning had the sole discretion of introducing dramatic monologue in English literature during Victorian era. Monologue means what? Mono means one, di means two, tri means three, tetra means four, penta means five, hexa means six, septu means seven, octo means eight, nono means nine. So monologue, log means conversation. Monologue means conversation between two people when one will speak and other will remain the listeners. Two people cannot speak like dialogue. How can we say that the other people should only listen? The other man or the listener will only listen because the poem is written in such a form that we can presume the existence of the listeners, though the listeners will remain silent forever. What does presume mean? Presume means supposed to. There is a lot of difference between assume and presume. Both mean supposed to, but we will discuss the difference between assume and presume in the next video or in the next class, whichever is possible. So in dramatic monologue, the existence or the presence of the listener is presumed. My Last Duchess, Fra Lippo, Porphyria's Lover, etc. are the famous dramatic monologues introduced to English literature by Robert Browning. Now Robert Browning's wife Elizabeth Barrett was also a great poetess by her own right. The poem which we are going to read, Meeting at Night, is a first part of the two poems, Meeting at Night and Parting in the Morning. Now you can all understand what does meeting at night mean, and parting means separation. So Robert meets Elizabeth at night and he will take leave of Elizabeth in the morning. So today we are going to read how Robert meets Elizabeth at night, braving all the odds, all the difficulties, etc. Now we are going to read the poem. Let me make it very clear that this poem is a lyric. What is lyric? Lyric poem celebrates the personal feelings of the poet in the glowing poetic terms. Now you may ask me, sir, why shall we bother about the personal feelings of the poet? Right, the question is a valid question, but the answer is that the poet or the writer, they have the unique talent of making their personal feeling universal. They can transcend their personal feeling into universality. That is why people read their stories, read their poems, read their novels, etc. When we read the poem, when we read the story, we always feel that these people, they tell that story of ours, which we cannot do due to the lack of creative talent. Similarly, here Browning narrates his own experience of meeting his beloved at night. It is a story of every lover who meets his beloved secretly. Now let me read out the poem. The grey sea and the long black land. The grey sea and the long black land, and the yellow half moon large and low, and the startled little waves that leap in fiery ringlets from their sleep, as I gain the cove with pushing prow and quench its speed in the slushy sand. Then a mile warm sea-scented beach, 3 fields to cross till a farm appears. A tap at the pane, the quick sharp scratch and blue spark of a lighted match, and a voice less loud through its joys and fears than the two hearts beating each to each. Now this is the poem. The grey sea. Why is the sea grey? Because we all know that the sea looks blue. Yes, this is the manifestation of the scientific temperament that was very much in vogue during Victorian era due to the Spartan scientific study. The sea looks blue in the day. Why? Because the sunlight falls on the sea water. But when the sunlight is not there, the sea looks grey. If you go at any seaside, if you go to Digha, Puri or any other seaside, if you see the sea at night, you cannot find the bluish tinge in the sea water at night. The sea will look grey. The long black land, in absence of light, everything looks black, so is the land. And the yellow half moon, large and low. It was a moonlit night. The moon looks yellow, and the moon, it was a full moon night. It was not a full moon night, it was a half moon night, and therefore the moon looks large and low. And the startled little waves that leap in the fiery ringlets from their sleep. Now the sea was placid. The moment Browning or the moment Robert started rowing his boat, it creates a kind of movement into the sea, and the small waves that the boat creates looks like fiery ringlets. Why the ringlets look fiery? Now let me make it one thing very clear. Let is the suffix. You have heard prefix and suffix. Suffix is a word which comes or which is joined at the latter part, which is joined at the end of the root word to make a new meaning, to add a new meaning. Suffix is called in Bengali Anusarga. So let is a suffix which means very small. Ring which we wear in our finger. So smaller ring is called ringlet. The small waves created by the movement of the boat which Robert was rowing is called ringlets, and the moonlight falling on the small waves which look like the ringlets make them look fiery. Now imagine in a dark night where the darkness is there all around, the moonlight is falling on the sea, how the sea will look like. The sea waves, the small waves of the sea will look like the fiery ringlet. And always remember that sunlight is golden, but the moonlight is silvery. So the small waves created by the rowing of the boats will look silvery in color, and that is what the poet has stated in the poem. As I gain the cove with the pushing prow and quench its speed in the slushy sand. As I gain the cove, Cove mean the stretched part of the land over the sea. Suppose if you look at this part now, if this is sea and this is land, this part, I don't know whether I am able to show you correctly or not. This part is called cove. This part is called cove. C-O-V-E. This part is called cove. And prow. If you look at the boat, the angular frontal part of the boat is called cove, like this. If this is the boat, this part is called prow. This part is called prow. That angular part or the frontal angular part of the boat is called prow. Now, Browning, while rowing, when he came to the shore of the sea, he just pushed its boat to the extended part of the shore, which he called cove, and the slushy sand. Slush means the semi-liquid substance is called slush. Slushy means muddy. Muddy means in Bangla kordomakto. When the sea sand is wet because of sea waves, that the sand looks slushy, soft, semi-liquid. Now the boat got stuck in the slushy sand of the seashore. Next stanza starts with the statement, then a mile of warm sea-scented beach. Warm. Warm means hot, but at a comfortable level. If we say hot water is the water is unbearable. But if we say warm water can be drunk for comfort. So the warm sea-scented beach. Why is the beach warm at night? Because you have read at the Madhyamik level that during the day the land heats up and the water evaporates into the sky. But when the night falls, the environment gets cooler and the water which was heated during the day could not cool down so much. That is why the water remains warm and the sea shore is being continuously washed away by the sea waves, and that is the sea waves which is still warm because it did not cool down so easily at night, and the warm sea waves made the sea beach warm. This is called scientific temperament, which is also manifested in the contemporary poetry. Now, I told you earlier that John Darwin's survival of the fittest theory came into practice during the Victorian era, and the effect of the scientific temperament, which was all pervading during that period, was also present in Browning's poetic approach. 3 fields to cross till a farm appears. Now 3 fields, this expression 3 fields, these 2 words suggest the eagerness of the poet to meet his beloved. That is why the 3 fields look very long distance. 3 fields to cross till a farm appears, the farm where Elizabeth was living or Elizabeth was waiting at that period. A tap at the pane, the quick sharp scratch and the blue spark of a lighted match. a tap at the pen. Tap means slight knock, what we call in Bangla toka. At the pen, pen means window panel. The quick sharp scratch and the blue spark of a lighted match. You all know what match and matchbox is, matchstick, matchbox, etc. So when you scratch the matchstick with the matchbox, the first spark is blue. Now the spark of blue flame symbolizes the ignition of fiery passion in Robert and Elizabeth. And a voice less loud through its joys and fears. This line is very important. And a voice less loud through its joys and fears. Now the voice is less loud through its joys and fears. So when Elizabeth saw Elizabeth saw Robert at the door, she should have been elated, she should have been excited, because that was the moment she was waiting for. But she was quite restrained in her expression. Why? Because she was joyous that Robert had come to meet her. At the same time, she was afraid. What made her afraid? Because she wanted to make the meeting secret. She wanted to make the meeting secret because her father did not approve her relationship with Robert. Elizabeth was affluent and Robert was not as much affluent as was Elizabeth. Therefore, Elizabeth's father did not approve of her relationship with Robert. Therefore, Robert and Elizabeth both wanted to make sure that their meeting remained secret. That is why Robert went to meet Elizabeth at night. They made sure that their meeting remained clandestine. Therefore, Elizabeth had a mixed feeling of joy and fear. She was joyous because Robert had come to meet her. She was afraid that none should come to know about their clandestine meeting. Then the two hearts beating each to each, beating in perfect rhythm, each to each, one after another, is called synchronization. Two hearts remained synchronized because this is the moment that they were waiting for, and this is the moment that they were waiting for eagerly, and now that blissful moment had come. Therefore, they had mixed feeling of Robert's feeling was not disclosed clearly here, but Elizabeth had mixed feeling of joy and fear. Now the poem ends with this part. The poem ends with the meeting. The next part, they are parting, when Robert would bid adieu to Elizabeth, would be dealt in the next poem, Parting in the Morning, which is not included in your course. The first poem of the two poem sequence is included in your course. This is Meeting at Night. Now I will come to the last line of the first stanza. And quench its speed in the slushy sand. Externally, that means that the boat which was rowed by Robert was coming at a speed, and that speed got stuck when the frontal part of the boat got stuck in the slushy sand. But here, quench means what? Quench means the satisfaction of thirst. What does thirst mean? Thirst means what we call in Bengali Trishna. When we feel the thirst, we need to drink water. Now here we need to drink water for what? For quenching our thirst. Here the quench means the quenching of the thirst will be accomplished when Robert will meet Elizabeth. Robert was thirsty thirsty for meeting Elizabeth. Here, the word quench is used deliberately to suggest, to emphasize how eager Robert was to meet his beloved Elizabeth. And one thing I would like to add to the discussion is that Robert and Elizabeth were the two most happily married couple in the English literary circle. If you look at the marital history of all other poets, none of their marriage was successful. But Robert and Elizabeth made the most happy couple in the English poetic circle, and Robert and Elizabeth were both great poets. We are reading the poem of Robert Browning, but Elizabeth had good number of poems to her credit, and Elizabeth was a good poetess by her own right, and these two people made their marriage, made their love memorable through their poetry. So meeting at night is all about Robert meeting secretly with Elizabeth at night. So that's all.